So this is what CC copies they have in the fall.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back from spring break. Did everybody have a good break? So I went home to visit my parents in Texas, and they recently had to redo their entire house because it flooded like a year ago. And I found this that my mom had put on their kitchen sink, and I thought this was just like a wonderful Don Norman, failed affordance here. She literally has taken a picture of the faucet, and, if it should be hot or cold. So there's a widespread crisis in the house of all the faucets being different and confusing. So thought I would share that since it's, kind of related to what we've looked at. So I want to get started with kind of just talking about the things that we've got going on, because we've got a bunch of things coming up, and we haven't met for a while. So the big one, exam 2, is posted on Canvas, and it's due Thursday at midnight, or 11:59. So if you haven't looked at that, I'm just going to look at it briefly, and if you have any questions as I go through it, let me know. So it's out of class. You can look at any material you'd like. Just don't, steal material and don't have someone else do it for you. And if you use a source or something, please cite, where you got it. And I'm not picky about the format as long as I can find it. So if it's just a URL or something like that, that's fine. And the exam is all about prototyping. So there are a number of questions that are just short answer, and it doesn't have to be a specific length. You can kind of see by point value, if you want to balance things that way. But as long as you answer the question, I'm more than happy. Doesn't have to be super long, whatever it takes to answer it. Then, let's see. Oops. So then there's so first just prototyping basics, definitions and stuff, then some stuff about methods and tools, and then the second section, or the third section I should say. This question, number 6, may take you a little bit of time. If you find yourself spending like an hour or something on it, then you're spending too long, unless you want to. So this is just asking you to use a prototyping tool of your choice to make this prototype, and then to report back positive and negative things about your experience doing that, and also to give me at least a screenshot or a video or whatever of the thing that you prototyped. And so you can spend as much or as little time as you'd like on this, but this is a big section of the exam. Then there's one short question here. And then I've put at the end of the exam just references. So I tend to do references just as numbers. Makes it a lot easier to put them in the text. And then just list them all at the end. So those are the things I referenced, and you can just change those or add yours, whatever you want to do. Has everybody looked at the exam, seen that it exists? Okay, we're all aware of that. Okay, I put it on Canvas in Word, like DocX format, and PDF. I wrote it in Pages, and it seemed to export okay to Word, but sometimes there will be weird things. Feel free to modify it, destroy it, however you need to do to be able to type on it or write on it or insert whatever you want. So that's due on Thursday. On Thursday also, I'll give you homework 3. So we've done 2 homeworks at this point. Homework 3 will be pretty easy, but I'd like you to think about it a little bit. So it's going to basically ask you to give me either a question or an area that we haven't covered or something that you'd like to see covered or answered before we're done with the semester. And that'll help me fill a couple of classes with hopefully things that are interesting. And then that'll be due a week from Thursday. Homework 2, quiz 3, and quiz 4, I have graded the majority of them, but I have not put them back into Canvas. So I will get that done by the end of this week so that you have that feedback. Then next week, we have FedEx presentations. So we'll have Tuesday and Thursday. I'll post detailed requirements like I did for Checkpoint 1, and I'll post those today. But to give you a high-level summary, what you want to present this time is a comprehensive functional prototype of some sort. It doesn't have to be super polished. It doesn't have to be the final thing. But it needs to cover the entire scope of the project. And it needs to be a functional prototype. It doesn't matter what you make it in. You can make it in one of the design tools. You can, make it in presentation software, whatever you want to do. But you'll need to do, and I'll put some requirements about the actual presentation. There are a few things I want to know, like, what your plan is going forward. Also, and I have this listed on the thing I'll post on Canvas, but you'll want to be sure to address any feedback that FedEx gave you. If you don't have that written down or didn't catch it, the videos of that session are posted on Canvas, so you can go listen to it again. You don't necessarily have to change the things that they ask you to change or do exactly what they wanted you to do, but you'll need to at least acknowledge, that you got their feedback and you either implemented it that way and it worked or it didn't work, or you chose to go a different direction. And then also pretty important, please attend. So as you know now, this will be a 2-day event because FedEx has lengthy questions. So you'll be presenting only on one day, but please come to class and listen to the other teams present. Even if you're just kind of sitting here doing something else, it's good to hear what other people are doing and to see their work, and it can give you ideas, and you may have questions or feedback for them too. So please try to attend. Are there specific questions about the project checkpoints, since that's what's coming up pretty soon? Yeah. Yes. Yes. So I'll post the schedule. I have that generated already, and I just randomized that, by the way. So it's different from last time, but so there's no specific order to that. Other questions?
You just flipped the presentation days, like the groups that went second last time go first this time.
No. I think it kind of did work out that a lot of people that went on the first day will be going on the second day, but I just go to like randomizer.org or something, and whatever it spits out, that's what I use. In general, is everybody doing okay with groups, and kind of, does everyone feel confident they can make a functional prototype of some sort? Kind of, okay. If you have concerns or you run into trouble, you can email me or come find me. If you want me to look at something before the presentations, you can send it to me and I'll look at it. I'm happy to help you however I can. And we'll do the same thing where I'll have you guys send in your presentations to me like at 11 a.m. Tuesday or whatever, just so I can try to have them preloaded. if you have functional demos that are like websites or whatever, you can go to those and pull them up and show them. If you need me to install something or have something ready, let me know a little bit earlier and I'll get that set up for you too. Okay. So just kind of an outlook for the remainder of the semester. We don't have a lot of time left. So this week, today, we will look at a little bit more of web stuff and with the Smart Nightlight project that we've been looking at, and I'll try to cover some more things, answer any questions you might have about web technologies and UI development. On Thursday, we will look at interfaces in general, but I'll probably focus mostly on non-traditional interfaces, so things that aren't a keyboard and mouse and a screen, and we'll talk about that. Also on Thursday, your exam 2 is due. We'll have a quiz on Thursday about web technologies. It'll be very basic, as long as actually I'll recap in just a second what we talked about before spring break, and it'll just be some basic things, about HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It will not be writing code. It will just be kind of, what is CSS used for? What is JavaScript used for? That kind of thing. So you'll see we've got quite a few quizzes through here. These quizzes will be easier, I guess, shorter definitely. We need to get as many in as we can because I think we set out to have 10 to 12 and we dropped 2 of the grades. So I want to be sure you have enough grades in there for that. We'll do our checkpoint presentations next week, and that'll take up the whole week. Your homework 3 will be due on Thursday then, which is just kind of what you'd like to see on these future days. Then after that, we will start to talk about HCI research and how do you evaluate a design, how do you study these things. We'll look specifically at designing and conducting user studies, and then we will look at analyzing data and how to draw a conclusion or find interesting things about the thing that you're testing. And then after that, I don't have anything in these slots yet. There are a number of things I'd like to cover, but I really want to hear from you what you're interested in so I can be sure to prioritize that. But there are a lot of interesting kind of HCI research topics that are a lot of fun to look at. So then after that, we'll have exam 3 is scheduled for our last day of class. And then the week after that is your final presentation. So there's not really a ton of time between these checkpoints and this presentation, given the fact that you have other classes and things to do. So the big part of after these presentations, you'll want to lock in your design as much as you can, and so that you can get to the phase where you test it with a few people and get some feedback to present on for your final presentation. And I'll get you details about what exactly needs to be turned in and what we'll hand off to FedEx and that kind of thing. Are there questions about this schedule? Does this look okay? No major concerns. Good. Okay. So last time, before spring break, we started talking about web technologies. So talked about HTML, which is the basic elements that structure a web page. And I should say we're talking about web technologies because they're supported on a majority of platforms and they're pretty useful, standardized ways to build interfaces. But we talked about HTML and the basics of that. We gave a really simple example of my page that I made here. Talked about how it's a kind of a nested hierarchy of elements, and that just by default, it's styled by your web browser in kind of this, way that's the default for the web browser. And then we talked about CSS, so style sheets, and the idea that they are basically a way of altering the presentation of a document. So HTML being the structure of the document or the interface, and cascading style sheets being the thing that makes them look a certain way. And so then we expanded on this example where we have our HTML file here, and then we put a reference into a CSS file, and we added a few things. We added a class to this element called beautiful title, and then we wrote a CSS file where we defined what a beautiful title should look like. So we gave it a font, a color, some text alignment, some padding, and then we, put a border on it and flipped it upside down because we could. And so that made it look like this. And that's just basic example showing you, what CSS can do, and there are a ton more things it can do. If you look at the presentation from that lecture, there are a bunch of resources for getting started with that kind of thing. Then we moved on to JavaScript, which is kind of the only programming language that's guaranteed to exist in a web browser right now. That lets you do interactive things with the page, so respond to events, query things in the background, get data, manipulate elements on the page, change CSS dynamically. And then we used our example, and we went ahead and we included a JavaScript file here, and then we wrote our JavaScript. And in this case, the point of our JavaScript is to change this adjective. And so we just have an array of different adjectives. And then we're getting the element, which is the actual HTML element with that content in it. And we're adding an event listener, so when you click on it, it changes it to the next one. Let's see. And so then there's the demo of that. It's just changing, looping through that. And so there was, when I presented this last time, there was an interesting bug, well, not a bug, but a mistake I made in the code where I referenced just the make adjective here instead of the element, and it worked. And that's just because the browser was very nice to me and was helping me out. So I've corrected that in the slides, but I did want to let you know that the browser was just trying to take care of things. Okay, and so, yes. So this was just another little CSS thing, making this little pointer show up rather than just the cursor. And so that's just a little piece of CSS saying, make the cursor look that way when it's hovering over it. So, continuing on with our smart nightlight. If you remember, this is kind of the prototype. These were the sketches. These are the more refined sketches. By the way, I made this in a tool OmniGraffle. I don't know if anybody's used OmniGraffle. So unfortunately, it's only on the Mac, but it's a really nice tool for really any kind of diagramming, but also wireframing and designing interfaces. Has a lot of built-in elements and a lot of nice grouping features. So that might be something to look at. I think the closest equivalent on Windows is like Visio or something, but it's not quite the same. So. Okay, so I continued to work on the smart nightlight interface in HTML a little bit. So I'd started this, I think this is 9:30 this morning, okay? So I just did a time lapse of while I was working on it, just to show you. So this is my interface here, and then here's the code, and here's just the prototype of what I'm trying to do. Because I knew we wouldn't have time to necessarily build this entire thing in class. And there you can see me looking stuff up. quite frequently. And so, and this is me trying to find an image. So you can see this being built out in the browser, and you can see the code changing over there. And if you notice in the beginning, I started I like to do, like if I'm doing the layout of things, to just make boxes and have them different colors so I can really see where my boundaries are, where things are at, and then kind of remove those colors. So you can see like when I'm working on that element, all of a sudden there's a cyan background. That's so I know what's actually going on there. And so then here I'm putting in the color picker and then trying to debug that. We're getting close to finish here. Okay, so and that's like 11:21. Okay, so it's like 2 hours of this fiddling around to get this happening. But I'll kind of show you a couple of pieces of it, and hopefully it will be helpful to you in your project. So let me get out of that, and let's see. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump over here. Okay, so let me just regroup a little bit because I don't have a lot of space here. So this is, so I've got this, if you remember last time we were using Visual Studio Code, which is available kind of on all platforms. And I'll make this code available for you to look at. But basically, I've got some files over here. I've got an index file that's just my HTML, which I've expanded out to kind of have all of the elements that I would need for this. And then I've got a folder with some CSS in it, a folder with some JavaScript, and a folder with some images. And this folder with just sketches, that's just some reference stuff for me to be able to look at. So now let me show you. If you remember in Visual Studio Code, we have an extension that we installed, and it's called Live Server. And what it does is it runs a local web server for the project. So that way, when I'm over here in my browser, and let me just jump out of that. Okay. So this is just Firefox, and this is, it's just serving from my local IP address the content of the page. Okay, and it looks quite interesting when I drag it out like this. So if you remember last time, we talked about using dev tools. So in Firefox, you just go down to Web Developer, and I've got them floating out here. Usually they'll be docked to the bottom to start with, but that can get in your way when you don't have a lot of room. So I'm just going to have them separate and float out here. And this is just a way to see what's going on the page. So this also exists in Chrome. There's a similar way to get to it. And there's a lot of documentation available from both Chrome and Firefox about these tools. But these are kind of the essential tools that you need so that you know what's going on. This will show you a lot of things, like on this page, this actually gives you all of the HTML. You can drop into it. You can see as I'm touching areas, it's highlighting. I can also do the opposite. I can just target an area, and it will, jump to the corresponding area. And it'll tell me some things. So for example, my title here, so I'm in the Inspector tab. And over here are all of the CSS rules that are applied to make this style happen. And so I can do things. I can change it. I can make it purple. There you go. It's going to live change for us. This is really nice for doing like fine adjustments and trying to see things live as they happen. Now I should say that this live server extension in Visual Studio Code, it automatically reloads every time I make a change. So that's really nice for this kind of app at least. And it's pretty quick, so that's helpful. So also just to tell you a little bit more about kind of the dev tools in the web inspector, obviously we have all of our CSS rules. We have a layout tab which shows you exactly how the layout's being computed, everything that's happening there. This computed tab shows you what values are. You can, if you have animations and fonts and that kind of thing, you can mess with that. There are a lot of tools here. Also, once you're doing JavaScript, this console tab here will actually show you, let's see if I get anything, any errors or warnings or log statements that are part of the JavaScript that's running on the page. So in this case, I'm just getting told about a source map or something that's not an error, it's not super important. But this is an interactive console, so you can do something like, in JavaScript there's a global object, it's just called window, and it contains literally everything. You can drop down and you can see kind of all of the properties that are on window, and all of the methods that you can call. If you were to use document, which is also contains quite a bit, you can see that as well. And so it's a really nice way just to browse what's available to you. If you're getting more complex, you can do things like set breakpoints in your JavaScript and debug things. You can work with the styles. You can do performance profiling and watch your memory and see your event calls. The network tab is also really useful. So this is just handy in general. There's not a lot loading on this page, but in this case it's showing me every request that's being made. So you can see first that the browser's taking the HTML page, which is then telling it, hey, you need these CSS files, you need this JavaScript file, you need these SVG files for some of the graphics, and so it's loading all of those in as well. And you can actually see all of the headers, the response, so there's like the logo that came back. In the case of the CSS, there's the actual CSS that came back. You can see timings. This is all really helpful as your interface grows, and you need to know what's going on. You can also do things like disable caching so that you don't have any problems with the browser, not refreshing something that you've changed. And so then there are just more ways to inspect things. So also what's nice here, and this is also, I should say, in Chrome, it's pretty much the same category, same functionality. And there's also this little icon that you can see. It's kind of like a tablet or a mobile device. You click on that, and it puts this into a mode where it's emulating one of those devices. So up here, you have a drop-down. You could choose an iPad if you'd like. You can choose, one of these iPhones, or you can just, drag this to be responsive if you'd like. And so that kind of helps you see what this would look like on different devices. You can also, rotate that to landscape to see what would happen. And you can apply throttling like 4G or LTE networks so that you can really get a sense of what's going on. There are also, nice features here where you can do touch simulation, you can grab screenshots, all kinds of good stuff for development. So let me go through a little bit of kind of the things that have added to this, just to show you the way that it's structured. So I'm going to close some of this just to make a little more room. Is that visible? Okay. See, actually, I don't know. Let's see if I can change my color theme real quick. probably a little bit easier for you guys to see. It's not in the dark theme. We'll try it. Okay, so looking just at our index file. So this is just the HTML file. And essentially, we talked about a template that we could kind of start with, some basic elements. We always tell it the doc type, that we're using HTML. This head section contains information that's not related to elements that appear on the page, but it's kind of metadata or things that the page will need. So we're telling it the character set we want to use, which currently is always UTF-8. The title, so that's what you see up here in the tab. And then I've got two CSS style sheets that I'm linking to. So it's just like importing something or requiring something in a programming language. And then I've got a JavaScript file that I've got here. So these will load sequentially in order before any of this appears. And to show you, so like the first CSS file I have is just saying go to the CSS folder, and this file is nl_reset.css. So reset.css, so we talked about the browser kind of has a default way of making things appear like a H1 tag is bold and big, and an italics tag as italics. Because browsers vary a little bit, it's common to do a reset, which is to kind of zero out a lot of those things in terms of padding and borders and font sizes. There are opinions about how to do this and what the best approach is. This CSS reset is an old one. It's by Eric Meyer. It's been used for a long, long time, and it tends to do a really good job of kind of setting things to a nice blank slate. And so this is just a file that I've taken from his website, and I'm including it. And all it's really doing is it's saying for all of these HTML tags, I want to zero out padding and margins and things like that, because they have some built in depending on the browser, which it just makes things a little bit easier when you develop. So back in the HTML, the next thing we did was load this nl_main CSS. And so that's actually the CSS that I've written for this interface. And so you can see it's gotten quite lengthy. And you can split this up however you'd like. If you'd like to do multiple files, certainly modern web development practices use a lot of tools to allow you to split things up nicely and then merge them all together and compact them when you deploy them. We don't need to worry about that because we're more focused just on building the interface. We're not trying to squeeze every last drop of performance out of it. We're not trying to put it on a content delivery network so that it's super fast. We're just worried about writing the actual CSS. So in this case, I've got it all in one file, which is kind of a mess. But to show you just in CSS, so this is the structure for a comment in CSS. So I've kind of labeled things, my main layout elements, title areas, things like that. And if we go back to the HTML, let's ignore this JavaScript that we're including. We'll come back to that. But if we look at the body of our page, and that's where all of the content lives, you'll see kind of the way that I've set this out is to have what I'm calling a title area. So in HTML, a comment looks like this, a little bit different than CSS or JavaScript. And so I've just labeled things that I'm making here. I'm using a lot of these elements that are divs. They're just divisions, literally. They're boxes, basically. And I'm building out the page that way. So you can see here, this title area corresponds to this area up here. And so it contains the logo, which is this little image in a circle for right now, and then this text here, which is written in here. So all of that is kind of bundled together. So those two are nested. And you can see already that even though there's this and then a new line and this, they're sitting side by side on here. So they've been styled to do that. If I were to remove the styles from the page, it wouldn't look like that at all. Which I can show you that. So let's see. Let me do that. So if I remove the styles, that's what it looks like. Okay. So big difference. And then let's say place the styles. That's interesting. I've broken it. Yeah. So this is. We'll talk about this little widget that I'm using there. Let us see what's going on. That's really something. Okay. Interesting. I don't have a favorite icon, but that's not surprising. Okay, let me just. Okay. Not sure, guys. Not sure if what got stuck there, but anyways. So there it is, back styled. So just kind of briefly to look at, I'm going to close this reset. So we were just talking about this title area here. And so I have this element just called SNL logo, and there's nothing in it at all. And so that means that everything that's happening there to make this beautiful icon of here is somewhere in this CSS. So in this case, because I just have an ID on it, I'm going to just jump to where I styled that ID. And so these are all the styles that I've applied to that ID. So you can see here's the background image. So essentially what I've done here is I've made a box. I've told the background of it to use this nightlight logo image. Using a feature on the background called contain that helps it to fit the image as large as possible within the box, but not distorting it, the aspect ratio at all. And then I'm not repeating it. So then the other thing that I'm doing is I've put a border on this element here, but let's see if we can move it again. So if I take out that radius, you'll see this is just a box. What I've done is I've added a border radius that makes it appear to be a circle. But by telling the radius to be 50% of the width, it makes a circle out of a box. And I've added a little bit of padding here so that it's not right up against the logo. So yeah, you can play with that a little bit. And so that's enough to get this here. And then for our title, I've just done a couple of things, changing the font size, making the weight heavier, and then adding a little bit of a shadow, which we could easily alter to give it a nice pink glow if we wanted. And you can play with these properties too, kind of get some different things going on there. So there's a lot you can do with CSS. So a big question is, why are these sitting next to each other rather than breaking for a new line? And so if we actually look at what's containing these two elements here is this title area. And so if we go to title area, here it is. What I've done there is I've said span the whole width of my interface. So the title area is going all the way across. And just to give you I'm just going to pull this in a bit so I don't have to keep bouncing so much. Okay. So to give you just an idea of where the title area actually is, I'm just going to put a background color here, and I'll just make it yellow. And so you can see that's that whole element there that's spanning across. And so I'll take that back out. And I'm using here, I'm telling it to span the width 100%. And the height, I'm using a unit viewport height. So what this is it is 10% of the total height of what's available on the view here, which is a handy element. So you can do height and you can do width. And as the interface stretches or resizes, that is automatically taken care of. So percentages used to be kind of the only way to do that, but they have a lot of problems. So these units are useful. Also, what I've done is I've made this a fixed element, so it sticks to the top because I actually have all three of my screens in here, but it doesn't matter what screen I'm on, I'll always want this bottom navigation and I'll always want a top bar. So I've made them fixed, and I've set their Z-index, so their actual layer ordering to 10, and I've set the others to 1, so they are kind of above everything right now. So this would scroll past it if I was allowing it. Now, the reason that these are next to each other, I'm using what's called a flex box. So I'm telling it to display as a flex element in a row. And you saw probably in the time-lapse video, I was consulting documentation a lot. I don't actually see Flexbox on here. But there are some great guides about Flexbox. Let's see. So this is a great one. That just shows you kind of you've got these elements, and how do you want them to lay out? Do you want them to flow this way? Do you want this kind of spacing to happen? Should we stretch? Should we center? Should we baseline? So all of this is available in really accessible forms to help you lay things out. And Flexboxes, so Flexbox is just one dimension, where there's also a property called a grid, which is 2 dimensions. And so a lot of sites are laid out using grids now, and it makes things really easy and really nice for resizing and dealing with multiple devices. If you guys have questions as we're going, please feel free to interrupt me. Yeah.
Are you going to upload this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll push these files. I'll put them on Canvas, and I'll probably kind of do more on them too, and then I'll push another update of them because this is by no means finished. So that's just to show you a little bit about that element that I have there. So I'm going to ignore this color picker for a second, and then I'm going to go down here to, I've got this favorites tab. Here what I've done is I've made it so that I can scroll through these. So if I were to add more, the idea being that the user could scroll through them, and I've just copied and pasted so I could see them, the behavior. But you can control elements like that and kind of how that works. So let's see. You can see this is the favorites list element, and I've got this property called overflow scroll. And that's what's giving me that scrollability. So if I were to change it to hidden, for example, I no longer have the scrolling ability. It's just cutting it off, cropping it. And so I'll put it back to scroll, and then you can see we get that back. So there are just a ton of attributes in CSS, a ton of things you can play with, you can work with to make things look really nice. I should say that I'm using, like for my graphics, for these down here, like the configuration icon, the My Light icon, these are Google's material design icons. And so they've got, just kind of this big set of them. And there's multiple ways to use these. So in my case, I just chose the ones I wanted, and I downloaded them as a SVG file. You could get a PNG, you can do a web font. There are a lot of ways to work with this. And it's also nice because these are in that form, I can do things like change their color, make them, like if you look at the pan tool, or you can go to outlined version. So when it's like inactive, it's not filled, but when you're selecting that, it's filled. So these are important things. I had used for a long time Font Awesome, which is another set of icons. But I kind of, when I was looking for like, I think just a settings icon maybe today, I was like, I wanted to use this one, and I wanted the unfilled one, but it's like Pro now, and you have to pay for it, so that's dumb. So I'm not going to use that anymore. But there are lots of these packages available, and a lot of them are free. But the material design ones are really quite nice. So jumping back over here, what I've got here, you'll see, is actually this color widget is working. And so it's allowing me to drag around, and this is updating, and I can change basically luminosity here, which is kind of what I wanted for my nightlight. Not completely. So I had this idea of this bar happening here, and I can probably modify this. So I didn't want to write the color picker from scratch. You can certainly do that. It's not the worst thing in the world. But because there are so many things available, I just Googled color picker and ended up at this nice website, which is this cool little color picker that someone has made. And so you can just jump over to the documentation, very simple instructions on how to use it. So literally, you just go to the GitHub link here, and what? Oh, yes. This is an artifact. So I use Firefox containers to keep certain companies, or to try to limit certain companies' ability to cross-track me places. And you should all try to do this if you can. Firefox calls it containers. Google kind of does it with profiles, but Google is evil and they're watching you, so don't use Chrome. But these containers, so the reason that this says CodePath is because I think last semester I was using GitHub pretty much exclusively for a CodePath course, and so I just wanted, anytime I went to GitHub, to only be in my CodePath environment. And so you can see I have quite a few different ones just to keep things apart. So I try to keep Google in its own box, away from Amazon, Facebook. But yeah, you should check out Firefox containers. Anyways, so here's this library that's provided. You'll see for a lot of web libraries now, they'll kind of all default to this installing with NPM. If you know how to use NPM, if you've done Node.js stuff or just used NPM or Yarn or any package manager, that's cool. This is wonderful. It makes things nice when you have to build big things. But if not, you can just ignore this, because it will probably be more trouble than it's worth to try to get this all set up. So what we used to do before we had all these development package managers and things is literally you can just download the actual code for this color picker. Here it all is, which is right there. Okay, so you can just save that. They also provide a nice minified version of it, so take out all of the stuff that, we don't need it to be human readable, we just want it to be small and get it to the browser. So let's see, that was a savings of 52 kilobytes, kilobits maybe, I don't know, versus 20. So that's pretty good. You can see over in code here, I actually have in my JavaScript file, I started with a great deal of optimism, just getting the minified one, and then immediately had problems, and so you can't really debug in here very well. So then I just swapped over to this one. And it's literally all you have to do is change this line up here to the other one. And that was just so I could debug easier. But okay, so let's just look at this library real quick to see kind of the extent of what I had to do here. So I have this area here. So I should say I've set things up as cards, and that's just, I've just made that up. You know, I could call it anything. So this is what I'm calling the home card, which is just this screen basically. Where we also have, this would be like the config card, and this would be like the usage history card. So I've put all of those in the HTML. So here's the config card and all of its stuff. Here's the usage history and all of its stuff. We can't see that because it's scrolled down below where we can look. But, okay, so looking at this home card, I've got this element here where I'm starting with this color picker. And it's just an empty div element, okay? There's nothing there at all. And because I've actually imported this library, if you look at kind of the instructions they give you, what you have to do to get started, literally you need a div element with an ID. So we have that. And then in JavaScript, you're going to need to actually create one of these color pickers and just pass it the ID of where you want it to show up. And so if we go over to our code, what I've done is down at the bottom, so after the body tag, and this is a good idea for the JavaScript that you're actually going to run. I could put this in a separate file, and I certainly would if this were, you know, something that I were building for like FedEx, for example. I would just reference a file, but here I've just put it all in line. So it's just in a script tag, same thing as referencing the file. And what I've done is literally this is kind of that line that they gave here for the color picker, and I've just given it my color picker area. So I'm going to get rid of all of this that I've got down here. I'm just going to comment this out for a moment so you can see kind of what happens by default. Okay, so this is nice because let's say, first of all, let's just comment it all out. So comment it all out, I've got nothing, right? I add in, you know, what they showed me in the tutorial, and I've got this great color picker. But this color picker does not necessarily stay great when I start to scale things. Okay, so there's like a bunch of white space happening, and it's kind of like off to one side now, and it's just not, by default, not what you want. So also I should say I had to do a bit of CSS tinkering to make it show up in the right place, because if you look at the documentation here, it defaults to a width of 300 pixels. That's nice, but for me, I don't really know how many pixels the device might be. And I found out I could not pass it a value of a percentage or anything like that. It didn't support that. So what I ended up doing is, because we have, you know, a JavaScript and we can just kind of look at the elements on our page, is the first thing I did was I created just a variable referencing the color picker area, which is where it lives, okay? So it started out that this was just an empty box that I made. And when I call the color picker here, that library inserts, you know, whatever images and elements need to be inserted to make this happen. And actually, if we look at our web inspector here, and we look at this now that it's been populated, we can see the code that's been generated, okay? So within my color picker area, all of this has been generated. So there's this SVG class, there are several things going on here, all of it, you know, I did not write, obviously. Came from the library. It generated it for us, which is what it's supposed to do, so that's good. But since it was having trouble, you know, scaling to the width of what I had there, I needed to be able to actually update that live. So what I've done is I've created just a reference to that area that contains it. And then I've created a function. So in this case, in JavaScript, this is just global, a global function. It's accessible everywhere. Anyone can call it. And I've just named it resize color picker. And what I did was I looked at the color picker documentation over here, and it was pretty easy to see. So if you go into the color picker API, there are some methods, right? Things you can do with a color picker. And so in this case, there's a resize method, and you can call it with a width and a height, okay? So that's great, because as long as I can find out what the width and height are, I can just tell the color picker and it will fix itself, and I don't have to worry about how. So all this method does when it's called is it takes my color picker, it calls resize, and it's going to pass it the minimum of either that area's width or height, okay? And that's because I want, I could drag this out to be very wide or, to be very skinny, and I want to be sure that I get the smaller of the two. Otherwise, this thing will be cropped off and not usable. So I'm just doing that. So at this point, this is just a function. It's not being called anywhere. It's not being used. So if I go over here and I drag this down, you can see we did not get a resize there. It does not look great. If I go in the console, I should be able to call that function manually. And there you go. It resized. But obviously, I don't want the user to have to do that because that's crazy. So kind of the next thing we can do is in the case that the window is resized. So remember, we talked about there's this global window object. And we can add an event listener to that. And the event name is just resize. So literally, anytime the browser window gets resized, this event fires. And it will call, this is just a function here, and I've just had it call resize color picker. So I can make this even simpler. I can just give this the name of the function, resize color picker. And so there you go. It's basically saying whenever a resize event happens, call this function and do this. So now, automatically, as I do that, it's happening. And that's just JavaScript doing that. Now, I also had this really weird behavior where I was getting a bug on the initial load sometimes. So if I think, let me see if I can get it to do it. Yeah, so when I load in, right, if I'm too small, it's not working because no resize event has happened. It turns out that the color picker itself has an event that it fires called mount whenever it's done creating itself and it's ready to be manipulated. So once it's mounted, that's kind of, then I know that that's happened for the first time. So in a similar way, I'm going to clean this up because this is just a little bit of notation that's kind of confusing. It's an anonymous function, but I'm just going to give it the name of that resize function. So when the color picker has a mount event happen, I'm going to resize it. And so now you can see when it loads in, it's sized correctly. And likewise, as I scale it, it's correct. And it's still functional. So that's pretty nice because the color picker itself is quite a bit of code, and we didn't have to write any of it. We just kind of had to look at this documentation, which is not that bad. There's a number of examples that you can play with. Obviously, the next thing we're going to want to do is whenever a user selects this color, we want to do something with that value, right? We want to maybe make one of these that color, or make our actual light that color. And so all of that functionality is also available in the color picker. And we can see kind of just all of what the color picker has here, but also you can just refer to the documentation as well. And so that's kind of just a preview of what you can do with CSS and JavaScript and a little bit of HTML. And to show you that it's not horribly complicated to get these things done. And I haven't used any real layout engines or any libraries, which you could certainly use. So for example, Bootstrap tends to be a really popular one that helps you do a lot of really basic layout kind of things. So if you look through Bootstrap, you'll find pretty much like every website you visit, has kind of this look to it now, and it provides a lot of this for you. There are a lot of libraries like this, and then there are themes on top of that. And so certainly if you want to use libraries, there are a ton of them out there that can help you get things done quickly. And just like we needed a color picker, you can also kind of go that route. Like I need something that will sort a table of data. You can just kind of Google JavaScript library to sort table of data, and you'll find it. You'll find hundreds of them. So that's the approach that really works here. Now you can also get into frameworks. So something like Facebook's React.js or Vue.js, things like that. Those tend to be a little bit more of an investment to learn. So unless you're really comfortable with this stuff and you're just wanting to get into that, or you're already familiar with that, I wouldn't recommend kind of diving into that because it can get a little tricky and you'll spend a lot of time investing in learning that process. But with just libraries that you can find, basic JavaScript and CSS, you can get a lot done. And it's important to know a little bit of the basics in terms of the CSS and JavaScript, so that it's not too confusing when this color picker does something that you didn't want it to do, and you need to fix it. You want to be able to go in there and inspect that and adapt that a little bit. So any questions? Yeah. Right. So that depends quite a bit. So if you look at the color picker specifically, I believe it tells us up front. So it's licensed under MPL 2.0, which I'm not sure what exactly that is. It says 100% free for personal and commercial use. If we jump over to its GitHub, typically the license will be there, which will outline exactly what can be done. In terms of your projects, it's not a big deal. If whatever, as long as it's something that people are allowing you to use, you're not stealing intellectual property, it's fine. If you were making an end product that you're going to ship, or like when FedEx decides to actually use it, they have to be sure that they use certain licenses. Otherwise, they're going to have to release their source code and changes and things. In general, you want to stay away from GPL license code. So MIT license, Apache license, those are pretty good. They're pretty friendly in terms of both non-commercial and commercial use. And I mean, that's an opinion thing. Some people really do believe, if you're going to use open source code, you should give back your code, and that's a great thing. It's not possible in a lot of commercial ventures for a lot of reasons. So, like, you'll find that a lot of companies stay away from GPL licenses specifically. But yeah, in general, these libraries will be pretty liberally licensed for you to use. However you want. Other questions? Okay. So that's pretty much everything I have today. I'll push all of these files up onto Canvas and the presentation and everything. And I'll also get the sheet with the details about your checkpoint 2 and the order of the groups and everything put on Canvas. So please do exam 2, and I will grade the things I haven't graded and put lots of things on Canvas, and then I will see you guys on Thursday and we can talk about interfaces.